Hi everyone. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how you can create variables and enter data on those variables in SPSS. So to get us started, I want to begin by showing you at the bottom of your screen you're going to find a little toggle between data view and variable view. So it's under data view that you will be entering values on your variables, and it's under variable view where you actually set up your variables and assign different properties to them. So we're going to begin our demonstration under the variable view tab, and I'm going to create three variables. So the first row right here that you see, this is where we're going to create our first variable. The second one will be for the second variable, and then the third one obviously for our third variable. So I'm going to begin under the name column right here for the first variable. I'm going to type interest. So this is going to be the name of the first variable, and when I press enter you'll see that various defaults show up. So where it says type for interest, it's set up as numeric, and this is going to be most of the time what you're going to be working with in terms of your data. So the variable types will be numeric. If I wanted to change the type of variable that I'm working with, I could do that very easily. There's a hidden button in this cell that I can press, and you can see that you have different variable types that you could work with. For instance, if I wanted a string variable instead of a numeric variable, I could type or press string, and that would allow me to have that type of variable. But again, most of the time we're going to be working with numeric variables. So we're going to click OK right here, leaving that type as numeric. You'll see that by default it's going to round any value that we enter to 2 decimal places. And then you're also going to see that where it says measure over here, this is where you will indicate the scale of measurement associated with your variable. So there's a hidden button there as well, and you can see that you have 3 options. You have scale, nominal, and ordinal. So basically, if you're treating your variable as an interval or ratio scale variable, then you're most likely going to be working with a scale measure. So we're going to press scale right here. And just so you know, under most circumstances, when you are running analyses in SPSS, whether you have the scale correctly identified or not, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. There are a few functions where you have to have the scale correctly identified, or else you'll get error messages, but under most circumstances that's not going to happen. So this is really mainly for your just kind of a friendly reminder, so to speak, of the type of variable that you're working with. So next we'll go to the second line, and I'm going to type in gender ID. So this is going to be gender identification. I'll press enter, and again the type of variable is listed as numeric. And for the type of measure right here, I'm going to select nominal. Okay, then the third variable I'm going to create is going to be educational level. So I'm going to type in ed level. That's going to be the name of my variable. Press enter, and again we have our default showing up, and in this case I'm going to treat this variable as ordinal. Now, when you're running analyses in SPSS, like for instance if I'm running descriptive statistics, then what's going to happen is that the values that I enter on these variables, the numeric values, are going to show up in the output. So for instance, I'll get a frequency count for the gender ID variable of 0, basically frequencies for group 0 and frequencies for group 1 if I'm using values of 0 and 1. So if I want to have value labels appear in my output, then I can do that very easily by clicking the hidden button under values and then assigning value labels associated with each numeric value. So for instance, with gender identification, I'm going to use values of 0 and 1 to indicate persons identifying as male and female. So in this case, a value of 0 is going to be associated with a label. I'll just type in identified male, and then I press enter, and then a value of 1 I'll type in identified female right here. And so when I add that and click on OK, I'm still going to be typing in values of 0 and 1 into my spreadsheet, but then when I run various statistics such as descriptives and so forth, then values of 0 and 1 won't show up, but rather it will show up as identified male and female. So it's a little bit easier to follow. And the same would be true for the educational level variable. I could assign value labels for that as well. For this demonstration, or for right now, I'm going to leave that off just so I can use that as a contrast to show you the difference between adding value labels and not having value labels. But for educational level, I'm going to be using a value of 1 to indicate freshman, 2 for sophomore, 3 for junior, and 4 for senior. So now I'm going to go under Data View, and we have our 3 variables set up. So in this first row, this is going to be the first case of my data set, and there will be data associated with each variable. So for the interest variable, I'm going to start off by typing 24.94. For gender ID, I'm going to type a 1, and then for ed level, I'm going to type 1 as well. So if we assume that these are students, for instance, at the university, then what these values would indicate is that the first student is a person identifying as male who's also a freshman, and they scored 24.94 on this measure of interest. For the next row, I'm going to type in 22.57, then a 0, and then for ed level I'll type in a 1. So for this student, this is basically a freshman student who happens to identify as female, and that student scored 22.57 on the measure. So we have 24.94 and 22.57 for persons 1 and 2 respectively. Then for the third one, I'll type in 25.08, and I'll type 1 and 1. So this third student would happen to be a freshman who identifies as female and scored 25.08 on the interest measure. So I'm going to briefly pause this video and finish entering the data, and I'll be sure to include underneath the video description a link to a file that contains a screenshot of the data, so that you can pause the data and or pause the video and enter the data yourselves, and then we'll pick up where we left off. Okay, so now I've created the entire data set. So another thing to keep in mind when you are creating your data set is that you'll want to save it. And SPSS, the two main files that you're going to be working with are the SAV file, that is the save file, and also an SPV file, and that's your output file. So right now we haven't generated any output. All we have right now is data that's entered into a spreadsheet, but it has not been saved yet. So to save this is very easy. Just go to File, then Save As, and let me do this one more time here. Go to Save As, and I'll just create a name. I'll just call this New Data. Alright, so I'll type New Data in, and you'll see that where it says SPSS Statistics saved file type as .sav. So that's what the file extension is for your spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press Save, and so now this data file has been saved as newdata.sav. If you go up here and look, you'll see it says newdata.sav, and I saved this actually in my downloads folder. You can save this on your computer or in whatever drive, but I just kind of was using my downloads folder as sort of a catch-all for this demonstration. So anyway, our data set here is newdata.save. And if it helps, I'll also include a link to this data set as it's set up underneath the video description. Now, as I said before though, when you run your analyses, you're going to get an output file, and if you want to have that output saved for future use, then you're going to need to save that file, and that file is an SPV file. So to give you a demonstration, if I go to Analyze and then go down to Descriptive Statistics, I'm going to go ahead and click on Frequencies right here. And we'll just go ahead and move the interest variable over, we'll move gender ID over, and ed level variable over right there, and I'll press OK. And so now you can see that this is basically our output file. So you can see that we just have some general descriptives related to these three variables. So we have a frequency table associated with the interest variable. Scroll down, we have a frequency table associated with gender identification, and then a table associated with the ed level variable. So if I want to save this output, then I'm going to go to File and then go to Save As again right here, and then in this case I'll save this as new data, and I'll just call this out. Now in this case it's saving the data file as SPV. So this is different from the data set itself. This is an output file, so it's an SPV file. So now when I save that, that also in this case is going to be saved to my downloads folder. So those are two separate file types. So just keep in mind that you're not saving everything to a single file, you're saving them to separate files. Also note that as you run various analyses, the output file will keep a running log of all of your analyses and all of the outputs itself. So like if I wanted to go back, let's go back to analyze, and let's just go down to, for an example, we'll go to compare means, and I'll just do an independent samples t-test for the demonstration. So I'll click on that. I'm going to move the gender ID variable over to the grouping variable box. We'll click on define groups, and we'll set our values as 0 and 1, and then continue. We'll move the interest variable over. That's going to be our dependent variable in this particular analysis, and we'll click on OK. And so now we've got the output associated with the independent samples t-test. So the aim is not, I'm not trying to introduce you to the independent samples t-test right now, but just to show you that the file, the output file, contains what we had previously done, as well as now the independent samples t-test. If I want to remove portions of the output, like if I wanted to remove the t-test, I can go over here in this log and highlight, and then I can just press delete and remove all of that output. So it's really that simple. Just keep in mind though that the only saved file up to this point is what I'd done previously. So if I have subsequent analyses that I'm including in my output file, I want to make sure to save those later on, so that I don't lose what I'd done up to that point. Now another thing to kind of note then is, as we look at our output, you'll see that for the interest variable you can see our values right here in our data set. These are what we had entered. These are the frequency counts associated with each value. This is just basically the percentage of observations in the distribution with each of those values right now, and so forth. If I scroll down, you'll see that with gender identification, because I had added those value labels, now you can see for the gender ID variable that it says identified male and identified female. So if I had not added those value labels, then what you would see right here is just 0 and 1. Okay, so as you can see, the addition of the value labels provides some additional description in my output that helps kind of make things a little bit easier to interpret. Or otherwise, I would just have to remember that 0 is associated with those identified as male and 1 identified as female. Where you see below where it says educational level, this is where we did not include the value labels. And so you can see with this one, we have values of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So as long as I remember that 1 represents freshman, 2 is sophomore, 3 is junior, 4 for senior, as long as I remember that, it's all good. But sometimes you can create a data set, and then later, maybe months later, you come back to it, and without those value labels, maybe it makes it a little harder to reconstruct what you were doing at that time and what the values actually represent. So to show you, let's now just go ahead and add value labels for our 4 educational level groups. So I'm going back into the spreadsheet, and I can toggle, or another thing is I can just double click at the top right here, and it takes me right to that ed level variable. And I'm going to click on under values right here, and I'll say value of 1 represents freshman, so I'm going to type in freshman, and then press add. 2 for sophomore, 3 for junior, and 4 for senior. and we'll click on OK right here. So that now if I go back to descriptive statistics and click on frequencies, I'm just going to go ahead and remove these other two right here, and I'll just stick with ed level. Now you can see in terms of the frequencies, now you can see that the frequencies are associated with the labels themselves of freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. So it makes reading this a whole lot easier. Once again, you'll want to make sure that as you make changes, if you want those changes to stand, you need to be saving your work. So I'll go back into my spreadsheet right here, and I'll press the save button just so I can overwrite what I'd done up to this point. And so in this case, what it will do is it will just incorporate the value labels as the only change. Okay, so now let's change things up just a bit. I'm going to go back under data view, and I'm going to create another case in my data set. Let's say that this case we have a student who identified as male and who happened to be a senior but didn't have a score on the interest measure. So in other words, we have missing data for that particular student. And so in this particular case, if I leave that cell blank, then if I go back and I analyze that data, we'll just go back to frequencies right here. I'll move ed level out and I'll put interest back in, and we'll click on OK. And so you'll see in terms of the frequencies, right up here it says frequencies for the interest variable, and you'll see that we have 20 cases that are listed as valid, and we have one case listed as missing on that particular variable. So if I go down and look at the frequency distribution now, you'll see where it says interest, we've got our values that are listed. We have frequency counts associated with each of those values. And then down here it's got the total number of valid counts, so the total effective sample size is 20, and it says missing system, and we have 1. So this is reflecting the fact that we had one observation in our data set for this variable that happens to be missing. You'll see too the percent column right here, this is just basically giving us the percentage of the distribution with any of those frequencies, including that missing system. So that's why all of those frequency counts for the actual values are 1, and then for the missing system you also have a value of 1, and that's why the percent is listed as 4.8. In the column with valid percent right here, basically this is the percentage of observations associated with each of these values for only those cases that have valid observations, which happens to be the 20 right here. So in that case, this 5%, and so forth, that's just computed by dividing the frequency count by 20 instead of 21. Whereas in the percent column, you're basically dividing the frequencies by 21. Okay, so in this case we just had a single missing data point for case number 21 on our interest variable. But when you're creating data sets, a lot of times you're going to be working with a lot of variables and a lot of possible values that might be missing. And so in those cases there are circumstances where you might not necessarily trust that you actually have a missing value, but instead maybe you might have inadvertently tabbed over or missed putting data in. And so one thing that you can do in order to ensure that you know that a case really was missing on a particular variable is to create a missing value code. So let's just say, for instance, that for that particular case right there on the interest variable, let's say instead of just leaving this blank as 0, I wanted to create a missing value code that gets registered by SPSS when I'm performing my analysis. So I'm going to double click on the interest variable and just take us back. Again, I could toggle over to the variable view, and where you see in the missing column right here, I'm going to press the little hidden button, and you'll see it says missing values, no missing values. So by default, SPSS will register any cell associated with a case and a given variable. Any cell that has nothing in it will be treated as missing data, and so that's why the default on this is no missing values. If I wanted to create a missing value code, I can do that very easily by pressing this button, going to discrete missing values, and then assigning a missing value code. And generally speaking, you would want to assign a missing value code that is far outside of the range of observable values that you might witness in your data. So if we go back and just take a quick look at our data set, let me cancel out of this for a second. You can see that our minimum value in our data set is this 17.23, and the maximum value happens to be 33. So we would want to create a code that does not fall within that range, or really within any theoretical range, if we were to collect more data. So under variable view, I'm going to go back under this missing value button right here, click on discrete missing values, and let's just say that I want to create a missing value code of 9999. So this is so far outside of the range of what I would expect on this interest variable that if I put that number in for a missing value, then I'm going to trust that that's actually reflecting a missing data point. So I'm going to click on OK, and now you'll see that where it says missing, you'll see that missing value code showing up here. So now when I go back to my data view, if I want to add that, I can just go down to this observation again, or this cell, and I'll type in 9999 and enter. And so if I go back, and we'll just go back to our frequency distribution again, I'll click on frequencies right here, and we'll leave interest in there and click on OK. You'll see now in our output that we have, it says missing, and it's got that value code that's given right here of 9999. So it's registering that observation as missing. So the missing value code, like I said, it's not a requirement or anything like that. By default, SPSS will treat cells associated with your variables and cases where there's missing data, or any kind of empty cell, as missing data. And again, there are times where when you're entering your data, you could end up inadvertently forgetting to put data in, or tabbing over, or something like that. And that missing value in that cell could reflect just a key punch error of some sort. So you could theoretically create a missing value code and use that to kind of remind yourself, and also let SPSS know that yes, this value is actually missing. Okay, so that pretty much concludes this demonstration of how to create variables and input data into the SPSS spreadsheet. And again, just keep in mind that there are two separate files that you would be working with in SPSS. The spreadsheet file is the SAV file. The output file is the SPV file. And so just kind of keep that in mind. So again, that concludes this video presentation, and I appreciate you watching.